Black History Month is an integral part of our nation's tradition, in which we continue to recognize and promote positive, impactful individuals. The Sports Shop with Reese and K-Mac, Salute to Champions, would like to recognize this individual for their contribution.
That's right. He is the Service Year Director, North Carolina Service Year Director for Initiative to Emerging Issues, Darryl Lester. What's up, D?
Not much. Good morning to y'all.
Good morning.
Yeah, good to be in space. I'm well.
When people say philanthropy, what does that mean, actually, to you?
Well, I always say it depends on where you were raised and how you were raised.
Okay.
I was raised in a rural town in South Carolina, so to me it meant time, talent, and resources.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in a household, youngest of 6 kids. My dad served in the military, Korean War, Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just ingrained in how I grew up. Everybody on my street gave back. So my mom, I was oriented early that it was just part of, you share stuff. My mom fixing dinner, she said, I need you to take a plate of food down the street. So that was always at the foundation of how I saw philanthropy. Even though I worked for a foundation, it was a steward of somebody else's money.
Mm-hmm. That's right. You had a lot of work at the foundation. Talking about that for real.
Yeah, I think going into it, when I stepped in and I was steward of somebody else's, I didn't get confused about what it was, even though I didn't always see a lot of folks that may look like me in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always that narrative around giving and philanthropy that some people are givers and some people are receivers. And so I knew I came out of that tradition that people gave, time, talent, and resources. And so I just took what I learned inside of the institution and decided I wanted to kind of connect that to more folks that look like you and I, so that they could, because I think there are a lot of folks out there feel that because I don't have a surplus that I can't give.
Right.
And so I wanted to flip that paradigm that it's never about your surplus. It's about your substance. So if you show up in a certain way, you can make a difference in the world. And I think it allows people not to be on the sidelines and say, oh, that's somebody else's responsibility. That's not how I was raised. It was like, that's my responsibility. I do what I can do.
Yeah. We're talking with Darryl Lester, who is one of our 2020 Salute to Champions recipient. Something we do each and every year during Black History Month. We honor and we recognize individuals of color that are doing significant things and having a significant impact in our communities in education, sport, business, and alike. And congratulations on being one of this year's recipients of
Thank you.
Salute to Champions Award, a recognition rather. One of the questions I have is talking about growing up. I saw you listed Strawberry Street in there because the street you grew up on. I always talk about Hayes Street as the street I grew up on. It's something that's symbolic, and for us, because most of us remember the street you grew up on because guess what? Our parents are still there. They're still there, right?
Yes.
But talk about now, looking back, how you can identify areas in your childhood or areas in your upbringing that really were about philanthropy, but it was really never talked about. It was just expected.
Right. So I think from the time I can remember being born in the early 60s, so the time I came out, there were always folks on my street, and there was never that stratification around who had what and who didn't. So that socioeconomic thing didn't play out. It wasn't until I ended up moving from South Carolina to Cary.
Okay.
That I was like, oh, and I ended up going to Cary High School, and I was like, but my parents prepared me well for wherever I went. And so I never saw it as people's extra or surplus. It was just part of what we did, right? And so when I got in philanthropy, my colleagues would say, well, I'm not sure if certain folks give. I said, it depends on how you look at philanthropy. So for me, and I continue to push against it. I sit in rooms sometimes with folks who probably have a lot of zeros, right? But I still sit. My dad said, when you go to negotiate and you go to communicate with people, if you got something on the table, son, I don't care if it's a nickel, a quarter, or a dime, the conversation is different. And then for those who don't have that, I always break it down to, it's like when you get up in the morning, it could be when I walk my dog and I see folks that live on the street. It is that notion that, do I speak to them? And so I can't say that I care about all this stuff when I pass people on a daily and don't say anything to them, right?
Right.
So to me, it's that small that I got to speak to people. I got to acknowledge folks, and then they can go from there. When I go to work at State and I pass folks in my office, I say, hey, good morning. How you doing? Because sometimes folks are getting their mode and they'll pass you and they don't speak.
Right.
So for me, everybody has something to give, but everybody's giving is not the same.
Wow. We talked to Darryl Lester, who was one of the guys instrumental in putting together giving circles here in the Triangle. Created one of your own. And talk about your giving circle, and you was a part of a national kind of movement there. Talk about that as well.
Well, the giving circles, folks always ask what it is. It's really an old concept. So y'all talk about the spaces you grew up in. Mm-hmm. When people experienced a crisis, people rallied around it and did what they needed to do for them.
Sure.
So all we did was took an old concept and brought it back to the present. Mm-hmm. Now, the twist was that I work for a community foundation. There are tools that people get introduced to around how to be strategic givers. Mm-hmm. And it's like you go to a car lot. You go to the lot and you say, oh, I want that. The salesperson might come out, size you up and say, no, I think you need that.
Yeah.
That's the same thing that happens around how we share tools around who can be philanthropic, who can give.
Interesting.
So when you go and you want to go, some folks will say, well, let me tell you how to get a grant. Yeah. No, I want to talk about the same stuff you talk to with Fred or Jim over there. I want you to talk to me about that. Mm-hmm. And so I decided that when I transitioned out, that I'll just spend my time talking to folks around what the tools were, regardless if they could use the tools or not. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing about that was, I used to get my hair cut by this young brother who went to Central. He started out, you go to the dorm, you're cutting in the dorm, then you go to the apartment. Yeah. Then he found himself owning a salon.
Yeah.
And I used to talk to him about what I did on a daily. Well, he was taking it in. Well, this young brother ended up getting this national award from the Association of Black Foundation Executives as a barber. And so it changed people's paradigm of who people think can give. Mm-hmm. And to me, there are a lot of folks out there that give, and we just got to help folks to realize you just sow where you can sow. The old adage, you reap what you sow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so we created a national network called the Community Investment Network. Mm-hmm. It's probably now about 15 giving circles across the years. It's made up of African American and Latinx groups, right? Mm-hmm. And all folks are doing it. They're pooling their time, talent, and resources, and so on. If you Google giving circles, you'll find giving circles sometimes they're large as 500 women that are giving significant amount. Mm. But you get on the other side, you got a giving circle down in Warrington. There's a group of sisters that I met years ago who were quilters. And I was talking to them around. So when you come together to quilt, are there other community challenges that you want to address? Mm-hmm. So they took the love for quilting and actually started a giving circle there. If you're familiar with Teach for America, Teach for America comes into a lot of communities.
Right, exactly.
Well, they wanted to bridge the cultural gap between the Teach for America members coming in and the community. So they created a cultural tour with their giving circle resources, which to me ends up keeping folks who do Teach for America in the community, in the county. Right. And so the model is huge. It's not just one model.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Right in the middle, have a great conversation with a great guy. I mean, I've known this guy for 20-some years, and when I hear his name, it's always he's doing some great stuff, and he's one of our 2020 recipients for the Salute the Champions, recognizing him right here, and again, Darryl Lester, who is he works for NC State Emergency Issues area, but he's also doing the service director for North Carolina, and talk about that real quickly, what that is.
Well, when I came back to NC State, the service year stuff was started in 1996. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And it was, the federal government says, if you go do a year of service in your community, then you will receive an educational service award. So it's almost equivalent of a Pell Grant, right? Okay. But you get a small stipend. It was a way to encourage primarily young people to go do work in community. Mm. And then by doing work in community, the government says you get this educational service award. You can use it to pay off a student loan. If you can use it to go to grad school. That's where a lot of folks are. Yeah. But even on the front end, for those young folks that were coming out of communities that might not have a diploma or a GED, mm-hmm. there were service programs for them that allowed them to do service, get their GED, get their diploma, and that's called Youth Build.
Yes.
So my role now is how do I expand the service year highway that everybody feels that they can do a year of service? Mm. Because it's not only around the altruistic pieces, it is this notion for some folks, it is a way to get a job mm-hmm. that leads to a career, right? Mm-hmm. And there is this narrative around service that certain folks, again, do the serving, right? And some folks are the recipients of the service. Mm. I decided I wanted to flip that. So instead of folks coming in from different places into a community, how about those folks who live in those communities every day?
Yeah.
And why can't we give them a year of service? So I'm pushing against that narrative too. To me, it's very similar to the philanthropy one.
Okay.
Because if we say that only certain people can serve, it's the same way we said only certain people can give. And so the front of the continuum is, if I start to learn to serve, then the giving part just comes really, really easy. But if I lock you out of thinking you can only be the recipients of what I bring to you, then we're going to have folks sitting around saying, oh, that's a choice. I ain't got to give back, right? And we got folks sitting around now that think that's a choice. I don't think none of us be sitting here right now if people didn't sow back in the day.
Yes, exactly.
Push on something. Right?
Yep.
And so I'm always thankful that what the folks in Marion did for me. And I always tell folks know I'm from Marion, South Carolina. As small as it is, the one Hardee's that we had for a long time, that one stoplight. And when I go home, you know, sometimes it is a struggle when you go home.
Yes.
Because you might see your boys.
Same
get
thing.
Up and out,
Same
right?
thing. Same thing.
But I knew what I got out of Marion. And the one thing I got was my parents transferred me a good name. So when I was walking down the street, the folks didn't ask me, what's your name? So they said, what's your daddy name?
Right.
And so I knew as I got older, I realized what that meant.
Interesting.
And so everybody, I'm a big believer that I got something special in Marion.
That's what it's all about. We're talking about Darryl Lester, who is one of our 2020 Salute to Champions recipient. Salute to Champions recognition is something we do each and every year during Black History Month, where we recognize individuals that have significant impacts in their own careers and in the communities and doing phenomenal things. And you're, without a doubt, not the exception to the rule. You are the rule when it comes to understanding giving and philanthropy and being an example of that. There's always this notion, this conversation around philanthropy that it's only for the elite. Philanthropy is only for the elite, which sometimes is translated into Caucasians or whites or what have you. People of color are not in that conversation. How do you speak to that? And really, how do we get around that? Because quite honestly, philanthropy is giving, and it's for everybody. And it comes in all shapes, forms, and sizes, of whether your time, your talent, your treasures, etc. It comes in all shapes, forms, and sizes. How do you speak to that?
Well, there's an old proverb that says, until the lion has its own historian, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So one, I always tell folks, you gotta keep telling your own story about giving. Two, when you look at the definition of philanthropy, it's just the giving of mankind, right? Or giving of humankind. So from that space, but I recognize there are institutions out here that create narrative, and that narrative affects how people operate and how they interact. And so until some of them start changing the narrative, but I tell our folks, if we know our history, this notion of who gives, we never get confused about that. Now, if you get confused about your history, you'll give credit to somebody else to being the philanthropist. See, I don't get confused about that. As much as I sat in those spaces, my colleagues were like, oh, I don't know, but if we really want to talk about philanthropy in the South,
Talk to me.
Philanthropy in the South,
yeah,
was made off of the backs of a lot of folks. I grew up 2.5 hours from Charleston. Number one slave port, for slaves coming in, right?
Right.
So when I go down to Charleston, I recognize that there are a lot of folks that came in the bottom of a ship, that sold in the community, that created wealth. The McLeod Hospital in Florence, South Carolina. When you go down to Charleston, there's a McLeod Hospital. But there's a big push now that when you go to certain places that were historically plantations, they're now reframing those places. So there's a big article now around we reframing them to be places where you can go get married, where you can go
really
have,
who wants to get married on plantation?
Yeah.
Oh, it happens all the time.
Really?
It's a prime piece of real estate, so they figure, forget about the history.
They're trying to flip it that way, huh?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And my thing is, question my dad always makes: who's going to be the keepers of our cultural memories?
Sure.
So who keeps it? So our elders and stuff are going away, right?
Yeah.
So those stories that we didn't want to hear about walking to school 10 miles and all that, we said, oh, I'm tired of that.
Right. We care about that all the time.
Look at the generations
Back when
now.
water was free.
Yes. And generations now, you start asking them to sit. When I sit with young folks and they start having conversations about the world as it is, sometimes the kids, they don't have they disconnected from that.
Wow.
Because they've been recipients, and our parents, for those who have kids, we want to always give them more than what we had, right?
Yes.
is that good?
Well, I'm not sure about that. We're talking to 2020, one of the 2020 recipients of Salute the Champions. Last question, D. You had a great event that you held, you put together, and next year I promise, K-Mac and I, we're going to be part of this event, and Jasmine too as well. But talk about it, if you will, real quickly.
So my colleague and I that came into work, brother raised in Halifax County, significantly younger than me.
Yeah.
Right? So we sat around, we're talking around. So here's our thing. I never define what I'm about by the title I have.
Right.
When I leave those spaces, I want to be engaged in community. So even though I work for this Institute of Emerging Issues, so Greg and I said, every year during this month, we lift up the contributions of Black folks, right? We wanted folks to do some more reflecting on the words those folks left. We know the contribution. So if we think about Carter G. Woodson, who created the first Negro History Week in 1926, which now expands into this month, Carter G. Woodson said, if you control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. And if there is no back door, he'll make a back door. The education makes it necessary. So when those words of yesterday are very applicable to the day. So we wanted an event that's centered around Black men and boys and allies to come and have a conversation around what are folks really saying that are, we call history makers, leaving for us to know. Because my mom used to always say, ain't nothing new under the sun. If your mind can't perceive it, your behind can achieve it.
There you go.
I'll tell you one thing. I saw you had Pastor James White on there, who was he was on our show during the MLK breakfast. He was phenomenal. Yeah. So I know people like that. I know they probably rocked that event.
That history panel, man, they opened it up. It was him, Vince Bayon, who owns.
Yes, I know Vince.
And then Dr. Craig Brookins, who's community psychologist. They opened that panel up. After they got through, man, we could have what they say, said a benediction, go home, because their brothers brought it, right?
Yeah,
they really. But it was such a blessing to see a variety of brothers on that stage, talking of everything from social justice and social change, health and wellness, all those pieces, financial stability. And we just wanted to have a space where it didn't cost people anything to come. We made sure folks had a decent lunch, and we wanted to have a conversation.
But that's and what's the name of the conference?
It was called the Black Lens Symposium.
Yeah,
it was based on this concept. We have this two-ness. The boys talked about our two-ness, and then there's the whole notion of the invisible mask that we wear. We just wanted folks to be able to say, we know where we are, but when you look in the mirror, do you really, really love what you see? And we wanted to, because we know there's a lot going on, but the more you love what you see, the better you're going to treat it and those who look like it.
Yeah, right. Well, man, hey, if I can speak for the entire crew here. It's an honor to have you here, man. The knowledge. Jasmine's taking a bunch of notes, trying to get it in, man. And congratulations. A tribute to you as well.
Thankful. Good job.
Good job, man.
Appreciate what y'all do.
Hey,
Go Terriers.
Yes, indeed.
Well, speaking of that, you didn't go to the game, did you? Were you there?
I didn't make this game.
Okay.
They moved it into the smaller things.
Yeah,
so,
Carmichael.
I think they thought they was going to treat their chances.
Oops.
He's rocking with. He got his waffle shirt on, man, and his hat.
When we won 2 years ago,
I
was sitting in a group and these guys kept heckling me the whole time. So every time we scored, I did this.
Smart move.